It's actually quite a journey. It's a really long story that dates back to my childhood days. When I was a kid, I had this little green and white mini radio that my mom gave me. It was like a compact radio from Yves Rocher. As a child, I would listen to it, skipping through the various stations, until one night I was laying in my bed. I stumbled upon a jazz piano concert or recording. That was my first encounter with jazz. That music resonated with me as I listened to it. It emitted a warm and cozy feeling. Of course, as a child, I had no idea about its history, but in my childlike imagination, I associated that music to a smoky northern German seaside or harbor bar. Jazz gave me a sense of calm and relaxation. After a while, my parents gifted me for Christmas a cassette recorder with a microphone attached to it, and I loved this present. I would record songs on the radio and add my commentaries in between, so I created sort of my own radio show. I experimented on a bunch of effects, and eventually, when those tapes wore out, I learned how to fix them myself. My fascination grew, and the dream of someday working with my voice and with audio material and working in a recording studio was birthed. I then started listening to children's audio plays from Europa, namely Die drei Fragezeichen or TKKG. Die drei Fragezeichen is better known as the Three Investigators in the US. Those audio plays introduced me to Carsten Bohn's music, which was a fusion of jazz and rock, which blended so well with the stories that it accompanied. I fell in love with that music. It's the biggest musical influence I had that evidently pushed me to enjoy the more progressive, intricate, and jazzy-like music. In time, I was introduced to gaming. My grandmother and uncle came for a visit, and my uncle had brought over a gaming console. I believe it was an Intellivision, a Atari clone with very simple graphics and sounds, and it had those numbers on the controllers. As I saw the Intellivision for the first time, I was instantly hooked. I was mesmerized. I don't know why, but video games appealed to me from the first second. It was love at first sight. The consoles evolved, and I got hooked to the C64. By then I had taken notice of the specific music that games had in them, and it piqued my interest. By the time I got my first Game Boy and then the NES console from Nintendo, my fascination for gaming music had grown. I had been exposed to various chiptune sounds that mesmerized me and completely drew me in. I caught myself often sitting just in the front of the TV to listen to the video game music. Eventually we got our first hi-fi system, and I was introduced to many more genres of music. My dad had owned a lot of records. One of my favorites was Pink Floyd's The Wall, of course. By the time I was soaring through my teenage years, I got hooked on more mainstream music. I became a big fan of artists like Britney Spears, and this was the MTV time. And in Germany we had our own music broadcast channel called Viva. And as I got older, I met new people who introduced me to metal, Metallica to be specific. I grew fond of the genre, and for years my taste in music specifically focused just on metal. Nowadays I don't hear metal that often anymore. But during those times, I started learning the drums as my first instrument, and along the way I laid it towards more progressive metal. I grew fond of bands like Dream Theater or Tool, until I was introduced to Darkstar. Their album 2020 Sound had me drawn to bass. To the bass guitar, to be specific. While the jazzy-like elements and progressive drums immediately resonated with me, and I think it's the first time I kinda heard something like psychedelic music, because the album has some psychedelic parts to it, it was the first time that I took interest on the bass guitar and that I closely listened to the instrument bass. And I think that's planted a seed in me that drove me to eventually learn the bass myself. By that time, I had packed up and moved out from my hometown. I started going to various concerts on a regular basis along with friends and rediscovered jazz and fusion once more. And around that time, I discovered krautrock, still one of my favorite genres to this day. I also started exploring electronic music and got really into post-rock, but nowadays I don't listen to post-rock as well anymore. Eventually, it was during those times that I ultimately realized that I wanted to do something with music. I had worked a variety of jobs by then, but nothing had stuck to me. I never grew to love any of them. And so I decided to study the field and pursue the musician dream. I moved to Hamburg, where I live to this day, and studied sound engineering and mastering. The idea was really simple. I didn't want the typical 9-to-5 job. That wasn't my world, and I knew that if I kept that up, it would eventually break me. Music was the one thing that made sense to me, so it only made sense that I built a career around that. But of course, as simple as that is, the reality of it is far different, but that's a story to tell for now.